It had been one of those mornings that felt like the universe had decided to stack every little problem on top of Sarah until her knees buckled. She stood at the side of a cold, windswept highway just outside the small town of Brookdale, clutching her worn tote bag in one hand and her 6-year-old daughter's pink backpack in the other. Her car had died again, smoke curling up from the hood in thin, bitter spirals, and the repair bill from the last breakdown was still sitting unpaid in a stack of unopened mail on her kitchen table. The biting wind cut through her thin sweater, and she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep warm as passing cars blurred past without slowing. She had already tried calling a few friends, but it was a Tuesday morning and everyone was either at work, in class, or unreachable. She was supposed to be at the elementary school by 8:30 sharp for a parent-teacher meeting, one she had been putting off for weeks because the truth was she couldn't face another discussion about her daughters falling behind. But now, stranded here with no ride and the clock ticking, she had no choice but to swallow her pride. She would have to ask a stranger for help. It's strange how pride works, how it builds invisible walls around you, convincing you that you can't knock on a neighbor's door or wave down a passing car because you should be able to handle life yourself. Sarah had been living with that kind of stubborn independence since the day she left her ex-husband. She had worked 2 jobs, budgeted down to the last penny, gone without things she needed so her daughter could have what she wanted, and refused to lean on anyone. But today, standing there with the wind whipping her hair into her face and the ache of failure pressing heavy on her chest, she realized she had no choice. The first car that slowed was an old minivan, its paint sun-faded and its driver offering only a curious glance before accelerating again. Sarah sighed and shifted her gaze to the long stretch of road ahead. Then she saw it, a sleek black SUV, clean enough to reflect the gray morning sky, moving at a steady pace toward her. She didn't think about what kind of person drove a vehicle like that. She just raised her hand, not too desperately, but with a small wave, praying the driver would take pity on her. To her surprise, the SUV slowed almost immediately, rolling to a smooth stop a few feet ahead of her. The driver's side window glided down, and she caught a glimpse of a man, mid-30s, maybe, with dark hair neatly swept back, a jawline that could have belonged on a magazine cover, and eyes that seemed far too observant for a stranger on the road. His voice was calm, warm, and without a hint of suspicion when he said, "Car trouble?" She nodded, stepping closer so she didn't have to shout over the wind. "Yeah. I need to get into town. My car just died. I have a meeting I can't miss." She felt her cheeks flush, the embarrassment of asking for help making her voice falter. He glanced at the smoke curling from the hood of her car, then back at her. "Hop in. I can take you." No hesitation. No questions about where exactly she was headed. Something in his tone made her believe him instantly, though every instinct told her to be cautious. She opened the rear door and slid in, pulling her coat tighter around her. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedar, the kind of clean, understated scent that didn't come from cheap air fresheners. She noticed the neatness of the seats, the absence of clutter, the quiet hum of the engine. The man glanced at her in the rearview mirror, then merged back onto the road. "I'm Daniel," he said simply, as if offering a name was the only introduction necessary. "Sarah," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She was aware of the silence that followed, not awkward, but thoughtful. He asked a few polite questions about where she needed to be, and she answered in brief, careful phrases. But something about him made it easy to talk, and before long she found herself telling him more than she had intended, how she was raising her daughter alone, how money had been tight, how the car breaking down wasn't exactly a new problem. She didn't know why she was telling a stranger this, except that his eyes in the mirror didn't judge her, they listened. By the time they reached the town's main street, she realized she had almost forgotten her initial panic. Daniel pulled up in front of the school, but instead of driving away after she thanked him, he asked, "How long will you be?" She blinked, unsure how to answer. "Maybe half an hour. But I can figure something else out for the way back." "I'll wait," he said casually, as though offering a ride to a stranger and then waiting outside for half an hour was the most natural thing in the world. She almost protested but found herself nodding instead. Inside the school, the meeting with the teacher went as expected, concerns about reading levels, reminders about homework consistency. But Sarah found her mind wandering back to the man in the SUV. Who does that? Who picks up a stranger and just waits? When she returned, he was still there, idling by the curb. He gave a small nod as she climbed in. "Where to now?" Home, she said, feeling the words heavy with gratitude she couldn't quite voice. As they drove back, the conversation shifted. She learned he had just moved to the area for work, though he was vague about the details. She noticed the subtle quality of his watch, the way his clothes were tailored but understated. He mentioned he liked helping people when he could, and that too many people were afraid to ask for what they needed. When they reached her house, a small, weathered rental on the edge of town, she thanked him again. This time he looked at her directly, and there was a sincerity in his expression that caught her off guard. "Don't be afraid to ask for help, Sarah. You never know who's willing to give it." He drove away, leaving her standing in the quiet street, wondering about the kind of man who stops for strangers. What she didn't know, what wouldn't cross her mind until much later, was that Daniel wasn't just a man with time to spare. He was the CEO of a multimillion-dollar company, in town for a project that could change the community's future. And this wouldn't be the last time their paths would cross. Sarah didn't see Daniel again for a week, though she thought about him more than she cared to admit. Not in a romantic way, at least, that's what she told herself, but in the way you think about someone whose kindness leaves a mark. Every time she passed the spot where her car had broken down, she remembered that black SUV pulling to the side of the road, the calm voice offering help without hesitation. In a world where people were busy, distracted, and often wary, his gesture felt almost unreal. She kept telling herself she should have asked for his number to return the favor somehow, even if just with a thank you card. But life swept her back into its usual current: work at the diner, evenings helping her daughter with homework, worrying about the bills that still didn't quite add up. Then came Thursday afternoon. The diner was half empty, the post-lunch lull stretching the minutes into slow drips. Sarah was wiping down the counter when she heard the distinct sound of a door chime, followed by the low hum of conversation. She glanced up, rag in hand, and froze. There he was. Daniel. Dressed in the same understated style, but this time without the heavy winter coat, she could see the crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to look effortless. He spotted her almost immediately, and the corners of his mouth lifted in recognition. "Sarah," he said as if greeting an old friend. "I wasn't sure you worked here." She stammered something about covering extra shifts, and he took a seat at the counter, ordering only a coffee. For a few minutes, they spoke about ordinary things: the weather, how her daughter was doing in school, whether her car had been fixed yet. Then, in the same casual tone, he asked, "How are things?" Really? It was the kind of question that could break you open if you weren't careful. And maybe it was the quiet of the diner or the way his eyes stayed on hers without rushing her, but Sarah found herself telling the truth. About the overdue bills, about how she'd been skipping meals to make sure her daughter had enough, about the fear that one more bad month might push them past the point of catching up. She didn't mean to say so much, but once the words began, they wouldn't stop. When she finally went quiet, Daniel didn't rush to fill the silence. He just nodded thoughtfully, as though he had been expecting her honesty all along. "I might have something for you," he said finally. "But you'll have to trust me." Her first thought was that he might be offering her a loan, which she was prepared to refuse. But instead, he asked if she could meet him the next morning at an address in town. "It's not far," he added, sliding a small card across the counter with the address written in precise, elegant handwriting. The next morning, curiosity got the better of her. She dropped her daughter at school and drove to the address, expecting maybe an office building or a community center. What she found instead was a sleek, glass-fronted structure with a discreet logo above the door: Hawthorne Industries. The name sounded faintly familiar, though she couldn't place it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and something more expensive: polished wood, maybe. A receptionist greeted her warmly and said, "Mr. Hawthorne is expecting you." Sarah blinked. "Mr. Hawthorne?" "Yes," the woman replied with a smile that hinted she was used to people being surprised. Moments later, Daniel appeared, looking every bit as composed as he had the day they met, except now there was no mistaking the authority in his presence. He led her down a hall lined with framed photographs of community projects, schools being built, scholarships being awarded, food banks receiving donations. "I suppose I should tell you," he began as they stepped into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows, "I run this company. Hawthorne Industries. We build infrastructure, invest in communities, create jobs. And part of what we do is find ways to give back directly to the people who need it most." Sarah stood there, stunned, as he continued. I've been looking for someone to coordinate a new outreach program here in Brookdale. Someone who knows the community, understands its challenges, and cares enough to fight for it. When we met, I thought, maybe you're that person. Her immediate reaction was disbelief. I'm not qualified for something like this. Daniel shook his head. You're more qualified than you think. You've lived it. You know what it means to work hard and still face roadblocks. That's the kind of perspective we need. The offer felt surreal. A steady salary, benefits, the chance to do something meaningful. But more than that, it felt like someone was finally seeing her for more than her struggles. She started the job 2 weeks later. At first, she felt out of place among the polished professionals and the neatly organized spreadsheets. But Daniel was there, patient, encouraging, reminding her that her voice mattered. She learned to coordinate with local schools, organize food drives, connect families to resources. Each small success fueled her confidence, and she began to see the ripple effect of what they were building. One afternoon, months later, she found herself standing at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new after-school center, surrounded by families who would benefit from it. Her daughter stood beside her, eyes wide with pride. Daniel gave a short speech about community and resilience, and when he mentioned Sarah by name, the applause was warm and genuine. In that moment, Sarah realized the truth about kindness. It doesn't just help you survive a hard day. It can change the entire trajectory of your life. One ride on a cold morning had led her here, to a place where she could not only stand on her own feet but help others do the same. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Daniel caught her eye and said quietly, "I told you, you never know who's willing to help." And she knew she would carry that lesson for the rest of her life.